Good morning, sir. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can.
Apologies for the delay. We had a very thorough fire drill this morning. Good morning, Mrs. Chambers.
Good morning.
Can we start, please, with the piece of homework that I think we set ourselves, and just to remind ourselves of some context.
Yeah.
Can we start, please, with LCAS 40224? This was the document we were looking at, if you remember.
Yes.
And you told us that this was an extract, I think, for some of some ARQ data.
It appeared to be, yes.
And you noted that the selection that had been made at the top under keys required this to be in date and time chronological order, and the data wasn't.
Yes.
And that it wasn't a complete record because there were lots of things that weren't on it.
Yes.
The first thing to say is that we've researched the document. The document was also provided to us by Fujitsu in printed copy and in Excel format. And the Excel document is in exactly the same format as this. So it, if any manipulation, I think you used that word neutrally, had been done, it had been done before it left Fujitsu.
Could I just say, though, that we do have a document which has got all this data in?
I'm going to move to that in a moment. It was just to clear up the point in case anyone thought that because this was produced with an LCAS, a Lee Castleton number, putting two and two together with what you said about manipulation, anything had gone on there. We've got exactly the same document in printed and Excel format from Fujitsu.
Yes. That certainly was not my intention.
No, I know,
like that.
But I need to clear these things up. Can we look then, please, at LCAS 301322? And if that can just be expanded so we can see the whole of the page, please. Thank you. That makes it not particularly legible, but we can see what it is. And if we just go to the next page, please. We can see that that data, I think, ends on the 8th of January. So if we go back to the first page, please. And expand, please, so we can see better. Thank you. Thank you. Is this also ARQ data?
Yes.
And is this, does this appear to be a more complete record of ARQ data?
Yes.
And does this appear to be ordered in ascending date and time order?
Yes.
Okay. Can you, we scroll down, please. Can you see an entry about 12 lines I'm not sure we're on the right page.
This is a little further up.
It's the first page, please. We're on the second page at the moment. To the first page, please. Thank you. And then scroll down. Thank you. And scroll down some more, please. Can you see an entry? Thank you.
Yes.
Declare stamp total 118,322.
Yes.
That's the same as on the extract, as I'm going to call it, that we looked at yesterday, but different from the figure in the cash account total.
Yes.
And that seems to have been declared at 1706 and 59. Can you see that?
Yes.
And then, is there anything else relevant on that page? I'm not sure that there is.
No.
Okay, and then go over the page to the next page, please. Can you see about 12 lines in, ONCH total 43,013.92?
Yes.
At 1731.20.
Yes.
What does that mean?
That's the overnight cash holding declaration, so they should at that point have counted what cash they'd got and declared it as an ONCH declaration. That was something they had to do at the end of each day.
Yes. And can you see about 3 lines into the second piece of highlighting, declare cash total 43,013.92, so the same figure?
Yes, I can.
Yes? And it says declaration complete. What does that mean?
They've done a proper cash declaration at that point. That was something they only had to do once a week as part of the balancing process. But you would expect it to be the same figure as the overnight cash holding for that day.
And it is?
Yes.
And we then see report cash declared at 1738.43, report printed. So is that them in the branch printing off a copy of the cash report?
That's them printing off a copy of the cash declaration report. So that will show what they've declared by denomination of cash, because that's how it was done.
And then at next entry, declare cash total, it's gone up by about £300. Can you see that?
I can see that.
And then that is printed
Yes.
a couple of seconds later.
Yes.
And then declare stamp 0.
Yes, I can see that.
I couldn't see on here a record of the stamps held in stock of the 5,500 odd pounds.
No, and I can now explain why that was.
Yes, please.
Okay, when the postmasters declared stamps, this was just the stamps that were 1p, 2p, that stamps that have a specific denomination on them. So they'd be presented with several screens and they'd go through and say how many of each denomination they've got. So that is their stamp declaration. Other types of postage, including first and second class stamps and stamp books and some other things, were not included in that declaration. They would be managed either by declare stock or by adjust stock, which is what Mr. Castleton did. So this postage stamps total that we've got is only for a subset of the overall postage. We can see that it's not at all clear on the cash account. I think I said in my witness statement that the cash account was a horrible document to try and understand, partly for this reason. But if you look at the final balance report, which precedes the cash account, and is using the same data that the cash account is built from, you can see on that final balance report the section for postage, which includes both the postage stamps as declared and all the other types of postage. And if you want to look at that, I can give you a reference.
It's okay, I've got that.
You've got that.
And so in short, this more expanded set of data doesn't tell you anything that we didn't know last night.
No.
You've just remembered something.
I've just by looking at that at the final balance report, it reminded me.
Thank you. Yes, that can come down. Can we turn up? I'm coming to the closing of the peak now. Can we come up, have up, please, FUJ 0014 6165. Thank you. This is the peak that we were looking at yesterday in relation to your investigation. And can we turn to page 2, please? And look at the foot of the page. And can we look at your entry of 15, 16 and 54? This is essentially your closing entry on the peak, is that right?
Yes, it is.
I don't think we've read this, but we ought to read it because it forms the substance of the evidence that you give in your witness statement, both in the civil proceedings in 2006 and in your witness statement to this inquiry. You say checks are okay, checks are being handled correctly, except for the 10th when the clerk forgot to cut off the report, but this didn't cause a discrepancy. Cash declarations look okay. They usually use drawer ID 11. Occasionally, they have a different drawer ID. This can lead to amounts apparently doubling on the cash flow report and should be avoided. Can you explain what you meant by that, please?
If they declare the same cash with 2 different drawer IDs, then when the overnight cash holding figure is sent off to the central systems, that will add those amounts together. So if they've declared it with drawer ID 11 and 22, for example, and in both cases £10,000, then the total for the day will appear to be £20,000, and that's what will be sent to the cash handling centre. But those figures are not used in the balancing process.
And that's why you said, but again, it will not cause a discrepancy.
Yeah.
And why would it not cause a discrepancy?
Because these figures aren't input to the balancing process.
You continue checking the cash transactions on the system against the declarations shows they are not working particularly accurately. The they in that sentence, who is that?
The branch.
I.e., at the end of the day, the cash they declare in the drawer is tens, hundreds or thousands of pounds astray from what has been recorded on the system.
Yes.
It's possible. So how did you establish that?
I established that by pulling out all the cash transactions for a period, and I now cannot remember the precise length of that period, by taking the opening figure of cash, which you can cross-check on the balance reports and so on. So you put that at the top of your column in an Excel spreadsheet, and then you work out the running total by making all the cash adjustments from that base figure. So at any point, you can see what cash the system thinks the branch should hold. Then from the overnight cash declarations and also the declarations made when they balanced, you can see what the branch is declaring that they hold, and then it's simple arithmetic to look for the difference between those figures.
You say it's possible they are not accurately recording all transactions on the system. There's no evidence whatsoever of any system problem. I've mentioned this outlet to Julie Welsh, Customer Services, who will try to get the post office to follow it up. But in the meantime, please tell the postmaster that we have investigated and that the discrepancies are caused by the difference between the transactions they've recorded on the system and the cash they have declared, and are not being caused by the software or the hardware. And then just over the page, please. I've checked various things on the system. All the internal... I'm so sorry if we... I think that's a repetition of a message, isn't it?
Yes, I'm not quite sure why that's there.
That's essentially the first sentence of your 1516 entry repeated.
Yeah.
In any event, you then essentially close the call.
Yes.
And give it a category number, advice and a guidance given.
Yes.
And is that advice and guidance given back to the HSH?
That was just the closure category that I chose to use.
Yes, but what does it mean?
It just means that I felt of all the closure categories open to me, that was the best one. That meant I had given advice, I had written down, in this case, some advice and guidance to be passed back to the postmaster.
Through the HSH?
That would be the normal route, but although I had said in my response I was also passing it back to Post Office via Julie Welsh.
And time, it says hours spent since call received 0 hours. Why does it record that?
Because that wasn't a field that we ever used.
Okay, you didn't record how long it took you to do things.
No.
Okay. So and then the call was closed.
Yes.
Can we turn up your witness statement, please, at WITN 0017 0200? And look at page 14, please. And can we read together paragraphs 41 and 42 to start with? You say, I felt the only way to progress the investigation was at the branch to check they were following the correct business processes and correctly recording everything that was done. Fujitsu did not have staff who were allowed to go to branches to investigate business or financial problems. This was the Post Office's responsibility. At this point, not having found any evidence of a system error, the correct process was for me to close, that's the peak we've just looked at, with my findings, and HSH would communicate them to the sub-postmaster. However, given the number of calls that Mr. Castleton had already raised, I felt this was not in his best interests as the problem persisted, and so I contacted Julie Welsh in customer services, knowing that she had a route to the post office and hoping that this would help Mr. Castleton to find the cause of the losses. Then I closed at the peak, advice and guidance given stating what I'd found and that I had contacted Julie Welsh. And then if we turn to paragraph 51 of your witness statement on page 17, please. '51, thank you. You say, I did consider the issues that Mr. Castleton was reporting to be unusual and that he needed assistance to get to the bottom of it. I was not in a position to give or organise that assistance.
Yes.
The way that you set matters out in those three paragraphs, 41, 42 and 51, may suggest that you didn't think that because you couldn't find a system error, Mr. Castleton or his staff must have either taken the money or have been responsible for the missing money. There was a business or a process issue that still required to be investigated.
Yes, I mean, it wasn't for me to decide what was wrong, but from what I could see, that the way the figures were swinging around so much each day, that was really unusual. And so and I could see from the calls that Mr. Castleton was raising that he was desperate for somebody to help. And I wanted to try and progress it. I certainly didn't just want to send the call back saying, oh, not us. I wanted to see if we could get him some more help, maybe so that he could do to help him sort of try and keep a manual records, or for somebody to monitor what was happening. I didn't know what the options were. As I said, this Fujitsu had no way of helping with anything like that at branches.
And so why did you think it wouldn't be in Mr. Castleton's best interest just to close the call and let the help desk report your findings back to him?
Because then it would just have gone back saying not a system error, talk to NBSC, and NBSC would have said, oh, well, we can't find anything, talk to the help desk. And
it would have gone back into the big machine?
Yeah. Yes, he'd already obviously spent an awful lot of time on the phone trying to get somebody to take some notice.
What did you expect Julie Welsh in customer services to do?
I knew that she had somebody in post office that she talked to about, well, I mean, it was part of her role, I think, to coordinate with post office, although I wasn't entirely sure on what level. She was one of these helpful sort of people, so I asked her if she could pass the information on to post office.
So she's in Fujitsu's customer services,
yes.
But she had a line into the post office,
yeah.
Almost outside of the help desk and NBSC machine.
Yes.
So you didn't know exactly what she might do, but being a helpful person, you thought she might have some influence or connections.
I thought she would probably pass my findings on to somebody within post office who would then be able to take further action as they thought appropriate.
You'd said in the entry on your peak, I'm not going to go back to it, that you passed it to her, quote, to try to get Pol to follow it up. What could Pol do to follow it up in your mind?
Go to the branch and, as I said, maybe help him try and run a manual process alongside to record, so that you could, at the end of the day, look for any anomalies. If there was something that they were doing wrong process-wise, to find that. At this stage, I sort of assumed that post office did have people who would do that sort of role.
Were you referring it to Julie Walsh in order that the next step could be an audit accompanied by an immediate suspension on the day?
That was certainly not in my mind, no.
That can come down, thank you. Can we move forwards, please, to you giving evidence and you being selected as a witness? Can we start, please, by looking at poll 309 0437. And page 69, please. Thank you. We can see that this is a letter from Rowe Cohen Solicitors, dated the 25th of July 2006, to the Post Office's solicitors Bond Pierce, about the case of the Post Office against Mr. Castleton.
Yes.
And it's a two-page letter. Yes?
Yes.
And I think you were asked to review this, is that right?
Yes, I believe so.
Just if we scroll through it and you just read it to yourself as we scroll through it to refresh your memory. If you look in particular at the second, third, fourth and fifth paragraphs.
Yes, I certainly saw this at the time, and then we did some work as a result of this letter, which isn't, yeah.
Can you remember who asked you to look at it?
I think probably this came through Gareth Jenkins, but it's possible that Brian Pinder or somebody else would have showed it to me, but I really can't remember.
Can we look, please, at... So essentially, I'm going to summarise it. It was said by Mr Castleton's solicitor that some analyses had been conducted of some weeks, week 42 in particular, and Mr Castleton believed there were some incomplete transactions and other discrepancies.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Can we look, please, at Fujitsu 0015-2295? Can we see, please, the title at the top, Initial Comments on Marine Drive Letter? Yes?
Yeah.
And I think that's a reference to the letter we've just looked at.
Yes, yes. So.
And we can see this is dated the 17th of August, 2006.
Yes.
Can you see that? And then if we go to the second page, please. And to the bottom. We can see that it's your document.
Yes, that's right.
Yes?
Yeah, yeah.
And then back to the first page, please. You go through parts of the letter, yes?
Yes, I do, yes.
If we look at the fourth paragraph on the page there, you say, looking in the full message store at the first of these.
Yeah.
And what are you referring to there, the first of these?
By the full message store, at this point, I mean the archive messages, audited messages for Marine Drive over this period. So at the time, back in 2004, all the messages produced at Marine Drive and everywhere else would have been sent off into the audit files. From which subsequently the ARQ data could be extracted, but it was also possible just to look at the full set of messages rather than the specific messages that were that formed the ARQ extracts.
Thank you. You say, I found the missing transaction was a stamp sale within a SmartPost session, and the start information had not been included in the message. Can you explain what you mean by that, please?
Yes, because there were two sessions that didn't net to zero in the ARQ data. You
wanted to know why?
I wanted to know why, yes. And it turned out to be that there was a line, a transaction line in the full message store that had not been included in the ARQ extract.
Is that a bug?
It was a bug in the ARQ... it was a bug whose only consequence was in the ARQ extract.
You say this was not an uncommon problem at the time.
It was something that did show up in the reconciliation reports, which I hadn't seen the January ones because they no longer existed when I'd looked originally. And I can't quite remember, but perhaps every few days you might have one or two entries in the reconciliation reports. This was for all 18,000 branches, so it wasn't that it was happening every day for every branch, but it was a problem we knew about and had been looked at. And the only problem was that these particular SmartPost transactions were slightly malformed in that the start date attribute was missing, which should have been there. Now, that didn't affect balancing in the least, but because the ARQ extract extracted on start date and it didn't have a start date, it didn't find these, but they were included in the branch balance.
Which is what you say next. The transaction was included in all the accounts, otherwise there would have been a receipts and payments mismatch.
Yeah.
And didn't cause any discrepancy at the branch. but has not been retrieved from the archive by the data retrieval, since that requires start date to be present. See the query at the beginning of the transaction log spreadsheet. And then you say possible further action if we just scroll down. A confirms second instance is the same. So far only have CAP 42 complete messages. I don't understand what that means. Can you explain?
The whole message store extract rather than just the ARQ data. At the point I wrote this, I'd only got the complete set for CAP 42, for week 42.
I see. Retrieve the TPSC 253 report for the day's counter exceptions, which should show the problem was noticed at the time. MSU and SSC no longer have this report, but maybe we can get it back through the audit team. Can you explain what you were suggesting there?
This was the reconciliation report I was talking about that we only kept for a very short length of time. That's suggesting that maybe it was a file that was audited that we could have retrieved. As I've said, SSC knew nothing really about audit and didn't know which files were retained. I'm obviously wondering there if actually it's something that they did have that I didn't know about.
Okay. And then C, confirm in some way that no complete sessions are missing for the same reason. Yes?
Yeah.
So to summarise, there was a small discrepancy caused by a missing Smart Post stamp sale.
It's
yes?
not a discrepancy.
Sorry,
a difference.
A difference, thank you, on the data. That wasn't an uncommon problem at the time, but there would be a daily report which would or should confirm whether or not that difference was picked up at the time.
Yes.
And that there might be a way formally to check whether any complete transactions were missing as a result of the known fault.
Yes.
Okay. And so they were your suggestions for further action or possible further action?
Yeah.
Can we look, please, at WBON 40027, so 5027. Thank you. Your document was turned into a report written by, I think, you and Mr. Jenkins, is that right?
Yes, he took responsibility for it, yes.
But this is jointly authored, is that right?
He authored it, but it is based on stuff that I'd investigated.
Okay. And this is it, yes?
Yes.
If we can read the first part, paragraph 1, as part of a prosecution associated with Marine Drive Post Office. Did you understand that Mr. Castleton was being prosecuted?
Yes, at this point, because I'd already had to produce a witness statement.
And what would you understand by prosecuting?
That he was being taken to court, I suppose. Yes, my legal knowledge is not very good. Perhaps it's the wrong word. I don't know. I didn't write. I've no idea if that's right or not.
In your mind, was there a distinction between a criminal court and a civil court?
Yeah, I think I knew there was a difference, and I knew that he was not being charged with any criminal offence, but Post Office were wanting to get the money that they believed was owed to them, and that it was a civil matter.
Anne Chambers and Gareth Jenkins have undertaken an analysis of all transactions that took place during cash account week 42 in that office.
Yes.
Those transactions are between dates and times set out, yes?
Yes.
The purpose of this note is to outline what was done and also comment on the letter sent on from the Post Office solicitors where Mr. Castleton is claiming to have shown that the Horizon figures are incorrect. And then scroll down to analysis undertaken. The initial set of data obtained was the extract from the transaction log that was submitted to Post Office as supporting evidence ARQ 421. What does the number refer to?
I think each ARQ request had a unique number.
I see. Subsequently, a complete extract of audit data for the period concern was obtained. This included non-transactional data, including opening figures, and the electronic cash account information, which was subsequently submitted to Post Office Limited's back-end system, and represents the same information as was printed on the paper cash account, which Mr. Castleton signed at the time to indicate it was correct. The figures examined have been completed with both the electronic cash account retrieved and also copies of the paper cash accounts for week 42 and also 41 and 43. Specifically, the carried forward figures from 41 match the brought forward figures in 42, and the carried forward figures from 42 matches the brought forward figures in 43. The initial check was that each session's data was completely recorded in the transaction log. This check identified that a transaction missing from the ARQ 421 data for a value of 92p on the 12th of January. That's referring to the issue you picked up in the paragraphs we've just looked at.
Yes.
This transaction did not include its start time, a known fault that occasionally happens, and so the ARQ extraction process ignored it. However, it would not have been ignored by the accounting functions at the counter, and a report would have been generated that night as part of the overnight checks. Unfortunately, this report is not audited and so is not available for examination. However, we do not believe that this report is material to the case. And so the idea of doing the 3 checks that you mentioned seems to have been dropped, doesn't it?
I don't think so. I cannot remember, but it could well be that by the time Gareth wrote this final version, he had checked with the audit team and they had said, no, that file is not audited or available anywhere, which is what he's saying. That's what he's saying there. I wouldn't have, I don't know. The other checks...
and just hold on, on what basis were you saying that you are now saying that this report, which you previously wished to see, is not material to the case?
I don't know quite why Gareth put that sentence in there.
Did you see this report before it went out?
I probably did. I mean, I don't think it would have shown any further light on any of the losses or anything, because all the report would have shown was that a single transaction with a missing start date had been picked up on that day, and we already knew from the full set of data that yes, there was a transaction with a missing start date on that day.
You previously made 3 suggestions.
Yes.
It appears that 2 of them hadn't been pursued.
I don't think there's anything in there that suggests that the other 2 were not pursued.
Why were you? Why was it the case that they were the results of those checks, if they had been conducted, are not reflected in this document? Because we found nothing, so there was nothing to say. I obviously cannot now prove that I did those other things, but knowing how thoroughly I went into everything, I think it's very likely that I now can only remember what one of the checks was, but I was checking everything that occurred to me. If I'd checked but found nothing else of concern, then that might not have been recorded in this document. Thank you. That document can come down. We've heard evidence from your then line manager, Mick Peach, that before you were asked or requested to provide evidence in the Lee Castleton case, another person at Fujitsu within the security team, whose function or responsibility it was ordinarily to give evidence in a case such as Mr. Castleton's, had declined to give evidence at court. I'm just summarising what Mr. Peach has told the chairman.
I had no knowledge of that.
I was about to ask, did you know that another person within the security team had declined to give evidence
No.
in Mr. Castleton's case? And therefore you couldn't help us as to who that person was or why they had declined to give evidence?
No, I couldn't.
Mr. Peach told the chairman that you were pressured to give evidence and to go to court, and that you were pressured to give evidence and go to court because the person from the security team had refused to give evidence and to go to court. Were you pressured into giving evidence?
I'm not sure I was pressured. I was extremely surprised to find myself in a position where I had to, because it had never occurred to me or any of my colleagues that this might be part of our role supporting an IT system. I just felt that it was all sort of handled rather strangely, in that I was asked by this guy I didn't know, who turned out to be, who was the security manager, if I'd be prepared to speak to a solicitor about this particular matter, and I said, well, I suppose so, and there was no mention at that point that just by doing that I would end up giving evidence in court and here today. So.
Somebody from security asking you whether you would mind speaking to a solicitor, and you saying, yes, I suppose so, doesn't sound like pressure.
It just seemed to be an odd situation, because then my manager was very cross about it all, and I didn't know if it was me having said yes to that initial question somehow it had led to everything else that happened, and if I'd said no, would it have been different? I don't think that is the case now, but now I know a lot more about the background of it. But at the time, I just sort of felt very uncomfortable about it, and there seemed to be a lot of people not very happy with the situation. And so, yes, it was just uncomfortable. I don't think I was ever given the opportunity to say, no, I'm not prepared to do this, and I don't know what would have happened if I had turned around and said no. I've always, attempted to do my job and to be helpful and to answer questions as necessary.
Were you aware at the time that Mr. Peach, your manager, had an argument about you having to give evidence in a corridor with either Dave Baldwin, the customer services director, Naomi Elliott, the support services manager, or Brian Pinder from the security team?
I wasn't aware of it at the time, but it doesn't surprise me.
Why doesn't it surprise you?
Because Mick was very angry about one of his team being put in this position that he thought they should not have been put in.
And so the argument wasn't reported back to you at the time?
Not that I'm aware of, no. I know he was talking to his management about this.
Mr. Peach told us that following the argument, he had a choice to select anyone from within the SSC to give evidence, and that he chose you because you were the most experienced and technically best within the SSC in the relevant area of countercode, that you had dealt with the call back on the 26th of February 2004, and he had confidence in your honesty and integrity. That makes it sound like he is picking you.
Yes, I wasn't aware of that. I assumed it was me because I'd looked at the call in 2004.
Can we look, please, at your witness statement, please, at page 18? And paragraph 56. If we scroll down, please. And a bit more, thank you. If we just read these from 56 to 59 to see that the account that you give, I've not been involved in any other proceedings against sub-postmasters involving the Horizon IT system before or since the Castleton case. Before 2006, I had never taken part in any legal proceedings of any kind. It had never been suggested to me or my SSC colleagues that you might be expected to become involved in such proceedings as a result of the work that we were doing. On a few occasions over the subsequent years, Gareth Jenkins asked me to double-check his figures or to help him locate Kells or reports. I was aware he was giving evidence in various trials, but I do not think I ever knew the details of those trials, and the assistance I provided to him would have been limited. I have no specific recollection of any particular instances of this occurring. I'm asked who asked me to provide a witness statement in the case against Mr. Castleton. Sometime in 2006, a man I did not know came into our secure office area, introduced himself as the post office account security manager, Brian Pinder, mentioned a call I had dealt with over 2 years earlier, and asked if I would mind having a quick chat with the solicitor about it. No mention was made of a witness statement at that point, nor, as I recall, of a court case. I informed my manager, Mr. Peake, of this conversation. He was extremely unhappy that I'd been approached directly and said that no member of SSC should ever be involved in litigation. He then talked to higher levels of management, but my name was now in the frame, and I seemed to have no option but to talk to the solicitor, which led them to requesting a witness statement and my subsequent appearance in court. You see that you got it another way round, namely security through Mr. Pinder approaching you, then you complaining to Mr. Peach, and then him raising it with higher levels of management, rather than management speaking with him and him choosing you.
That was how I thought it was until I read or saw what Mick said in evidence to the inquiry.
And has your recollection altered at all in the light of what Mr. Peach has said to the inquiry?
No, I don't think so, except possibly his reaction now is a little bit more understandable.
Your recollection is they came direct to you, then you went to Mr. Peach?
Yes, Brian Pinder most definitely came and talked to me, and then I mentioned it. So I'm assuming now that Mick knew that they were likely to want to talk to me, but he was probably very cross then that they had actually come straight to me rather than go through him.
Can we just look at your afterthoughts document, because this, I think, helps us a little bit on this issue. Fujitsu 0015 2299. We're going to look at this in more detail a little later this morning, but if we just turn to page 2 to start with, we can see that this is a document, and scroll down please, that you wrote on the 29th of January 2007.
Yes.
And so it was prepared much nearer to the events we're considering.
Yes.
And we're going to look, as I say, in detail at this document a little later. But I just want to, if we go back to page 1, please, to look what's said in the first paragraph. In the summer of 2006, I was asked directly by the security manager, that's Mr. Pinder, yes?
Yes.
Whether I would be prepared to speak to a solicitor about a call I dealt with in February 2004. My initial response was that this was not the normal process, but he reassured me that it was more or less a formality. So somewhat reluctantly, I agreed. That is consistent with what you told us, and you said in your witness statement that it was a direct approach to him rather than through Mr. Peach.
Yes.
You say that you said this was not the normal process. What was the normal process?
I'm not sure I knew precisely what the normal process was. I'm not sure if there had been any previous court cases. I think I was aware that some people within the security team, perhaps in particular Penny Thomas, would occasionally have to go to court to give evidence.
And just interrupting you there, if I may, did they liaise with the SSC in preparation to give evidence to court?
I've got no specific memory of that happening. I don't think I knew Penny very well at that stage, and I don't recall having actually worked with her on anything.
And what about Andrew Dunks? Can you remember him performing the same function?
Yes, again, I knew who he was, but I don't think I'd had anything specifically to do with him. Possibly, and I can't remember if this is before or after, he might have asked me about a particular power help call or something, but I don't think I'd done, I'm sure I had not done anything except possibly answer a sort of very quick, simple question.
Were you aware of any of those people, i.e. Mr. Dunks or Penny Thomas or similar from the security team, obtaining evidence or material from the SSC as part of the process of preparing to go to court?
I don't remember that happening. I think the security team were very separate, and they had access to the ARQ data, and it was their job to extract the ARQ data. And
were they experts in its interpretation?
No.
Okay, that can come down, please. If we can go back to paragraph 61 of your witness statement, which is on page 19. Page 19, please. And at the foot of the page, paragraph 61, you say, I think there was an initial meeting with a solicitor, presumably Stephen Dilley, in a Fujitsu office in Bracknell. Mick Peach's manager, Naomi Elliott, was present at that meeting or a subsequent one. It was explained to me, I think in the initial meeting, that I would be a witness of fact and not an expert witness, and the purpose of my witness statement was to document my investigation of the 26th of February 2004.
Yes.
You recall that you were told in the first meeting that you would be a witness of fact, capital W, capital F, not an expert witness, capital E, capital W. Did you then have an understanding of the distinction?
Not clearly. I've got very little memory of this meeting, but I know, I'd heard the phrase expert witness before, but I don't think I'd ever heard the phrase witness of fact. But it was explained to me that, I wasn't going there to talk about the whole system. It was just to say about my investigation and what I had found.
And who gave you this explanation?
I can't remember.
Was it...
Most likely, I think, the solicitor, but I suppose it could have been Brian Pinder or somebody, but it seems more likely that it was Stephen Dilley.
By this time, had you had any training or guidance from Fujitsu or indeed the post office on the differences between those two broad species of witness?
No training or guidance, just this sort of basic statement that I was just talking about what I had done and not about the overall system.
Had you received any training or guidance from Fujitsu or indeed the Post Office on the responsibilities involved in giving evidence as a witness of fact or as an expert witness?
I don't recall anybody spelling out any specific responsibilities.
Now, subsequently, we know that you carried out investigations and gave some evidence about matters beyond the strict confines of what you had done on the 26th of February 2004.
Yes, I did.
You analysed with Mr. Jenkins the contents of the solicitor's letter and provided a response to it.
Yes, I think at the time I saw that as being a sort of separate exercise, not connected really with the witness statement that I was making.
But you got more dragged into things other than the strict confines of the facts of what had happened on the 26th of February.
Yes, I mean, partly through my own choice, because I wanted to be absolutely sure as I could be that I hadn't missed anything at all back in that original February. As we discussed yesterday, I hadn't possibly gone back as far as I could have done in January. So in the run-up to the trial or so on, I spent a great deal of time rechecking the archived, audited message store data to see if I could find any reason for the losses that I might have missed originally.
And you, in the witness statement and then in court, gave a view on that? You gave your assessment?
I'm not sure that my witness statement said anything about any subsequent checks that I had made, and I'm not sure that that actually got picked up on in court either.
Had anyone told you about the need, if you are conducting investigations, where you may end up giving a view or an assessment of the need to make a record, a contemporaneous record of what it is you're doing?
No.
And to retain the product of your investigations?
No, nobody ever said anything about that.
Your working notes or the data that you'd captured?
No, I mean, for the looking at the CAP 42 cash account, I know we do have that data because we have it here now. And obviously I kept that and then passed it on to Gareth so he could check and so on. But all the other checks that I made, I would have had a lot of various spreadsheets and so on at the time, but nobody said I needed to retain them or say that I'd got them.
You say subsequently that you were put in an invidious position when you revealed in court that you had used a Tivoli event log in the course of your investigations and that hadn't been disclosed.
That I'd used them in the 2006 investigations, yes.
And you regarded yourself as being, we're going to look at it in the afterthoughts document in a moment, being in a difficult spot because you were talking about something and there had been no disclosure of the underlying material.
Yes, I mean, yes, we may want to talk about this some more, but yes, I felt very awkward about that.
Was there a discussion at the time about the awkwardness that you felt about being on the stand in the High Court, speaking about events in respect of which there had been no disclosure?
Discussion with whom?
The solicitor, Mr. Dilly?
I'm not sure that it was discussed. Oh, I know Stephen Dilly did subsequently send me an email, which I then passed on to various other people in Fujitsu, sort of pointing out the disclosure rules and so on. But I personally had no responsibility for disclosures and so on, and hadn't didn't know what had been disclosed or what should be. These particular event logs, we'd only found that they did still exist about a couple of weeks before the trial started, when following up a different query that somebody had made regarding Marine Drive. And it was just because one of my colleagues in SSC went looking to see what else, whether these files were archived, and discovered that yes, they were. It wasn't part of the formal audit process, it was just a file archive. But yes, they existed, and so when I found that I was talking about them because of a misunderstanding
between you and Mr. Morgan?
Between me and Mr. Morgan, and I was asked if they existed, of course I said yes, they do.
And that caused a kerfuffle?
It felt like a bit of a kerfuffle because I think everybody was ready to wind everything up and go away for Christmas. And
you had to come back in January?
They had to come back again.
So is this a fair summary? Although you spent time in 2006 looking at a wider range of data than you had looked at in 2004, you didn't keep a disclosable record of what you did in 2006, what record you used, what you were looking for, and what the product of it was.
Yes,
Is that fair?
I didn't keep that at the time, no.
And so Mr. Castleton and his legal team, if he had one, had no way of reviewing what you had done, replicating it, and finding out for themselves whether there were mistakes in your approach or your methodology.
No, although I was looking really to see if I could find something that would help him rather than the opposite.
Yes, I completely understand that.
Yeah.
But in the event, the material to show your workings out was not available.
That was not available, no.
Similarly, when in court you spoke about the Calendar Square bug,
Yes.
the relevant underlying documents, for example, the KELS, hadn't been provided. It was just your evidence about what had happened with the Calendar Square bug and your view that it hadn't afflicted Marine Drive that the court had to go on.
Yes, I had been told quite early on in the process that KELS was something that were not disclosed.
And why were KELS not disclosed?
I don't know.
And who told you this?
I can't remember if it was my manager or somebody on the security team, but I was told explicitly to talk about power help calls rather than peaks, and that KELS weren't disclosed nor peaks.
Was that because they revealed known errors from their title?
I don't know why. I was just told that was how it was.
And can you, you said one of your managers. Does that mean Mr. Parker or Mr. Peach?
At that point, it would have been, if it was my manager, it would have been Mick Peach or potentially Naomi Elliott.
i.e. the manager of the manager?
Yeah. Or potentially Brian Pinder, or potentially Stephen Dilly, but I don't think that was Stephen Dilly. I think it was somebody on the Fujitsu side.
And so known error logs just weren't disclosed, and that was the way it was?
That was what I was told, and although I thought it seemed strange, I didn't know it was wrong.
Why did you think it was strange?
Because I would thought, in my layman's terms, I thought you had to disclose everything. But I was not a legal expert, and I had no idea, whether, as I said, whether this was right or wrong, and it was not, not my responsibility.
And this was in the context of a case where a man was saying, I think there are things wrong with the system, I'm Mr. Castleton, and these known error logs revealed problems with the system, whether they were attributable to his branch or not. That was in the context you were thinking, presumably.
No, it was just sort of general, there is this information, do we not have to share it with them?
You said that you were told to refer instead to the Power Help records.
Yes.
The Power Help records are not a replica of the known error logs, are they?
No.
there's no equivalence between them. In particular, the known error log might reveal for how long a problem was known by Fujitsu and the promptitude of steps taken to resolve it.
Yes, you couldn't necessarily work out the timescale from the KEL for various reasons, but it would give you more of a clue as to what was happening and certainly when it started.
You'd be more likely to be able to work out when the problem first emerged.
It would probably give you more of a clue, yes.
And there's more discussion in a KEL, is this right? Sort of more inward-facing discussion by Fujitsu as to whether the error is acknowledged than in a power help call, which is more about a customer complaining.
Yes, I think when there were errors, we acknowledged them, certainly on peaks, but power help calls, it just depends who dealt with them and who decided to put information on them.
It could be very variable, the information that went on to a power help.
Yes.
Could certainly be the customer complaint, the branch saying, I've got a problem.
Yeah.
But it was hit and miss whether the investigation and the acknowledgement of a problem got onto a power help call.
To some extent. I mean, I think these calls that you have been looking at are the ones where that was most likely to happen. I would say the vast majority of power help calls, which were much more fixed issues, then they were pretty good. But yes, these areas where the responsibility between MBSC and I think, yes, if there was a known problem identified by power help, then certainly if it had come to peak, you would have the peak response on there too. If it had just been handled by the help desk, then they might not have spelt it out so much if it was a system error. But
so you ended up giving evidence about the Calendar Square bug?
Yes.
Without the two KELs having been disclosed that revealed that there had been an appreciable delay in addressing the Calendar Square bug?
Yes, those KELs weren't disclosed.
Looking back, do you feel that the initial brief that you were going to give evidence, factual evidence, about your limited help desk investigation conducted within a 5-hour period on the 26th of February 2004 was honoured?
No, partly because Mr. Castleton asked me a wider range of questions than I was expecting, but it seemed only right to try and answer the questions that were put to me, but at times I realised I sounded a little unsure because it wasn't things that I had been expecting to be asked about.
Thank you. So that's an appropriate moment for the morning break, if it's convenient to you.
Yes, certainly. So what time shall we resume?
1:30, please.
Fine.
Thank you. Good morning, sir. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can, yes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chambers, can we see what you say in your witness statement about a couple of issues that concern the topic we're presently on? And therefore, if we can look at page 23 of your witness statement. At the foot of the page, paragraph 74. You say on the 17th of August 2006, I wrote to Gareth in the following terms. I've spent some time recalculating the CAP 42 cash account for Marine Drive and addressing the points in the letter from the solicitor. I hope it makes enough sense to provide you with a starting point, not quite at the very beginning. Subsequent cash accounts, if needed, should be much easier now I have the mappings set up and some idea of what numbers need to go where. And then I'm scrolling down. I'm now going to look at the loss made in week 42 and demonstrate that it was due to the difference between system holdings and declared holdings. If this isn't at all what you wanted, please let me know. I don't really know what I'm doing. This hasn't had my full attention. Lots of people are on leave. And Martin landed me with a tricky Pole FSFP issue. Also, yesterday I got my witness statement, which is, as I suspect you found, full of things I didn't say or do, including all those power help calls. Picking up on a couple of things that you said there. You say that you are looking to demonstrate whether the loss was due to the difference between system holdings and declared holdings.
Yes.
Would that exercise tell us if the holdings recorded by the system were inaccurate by reason of a bug, error, or defect in Horizon?
Sorry, I need to think about that a little bit. The system holdings, you calculate, well, you can see the opening figures at the start of a period, and then by looking at all the transaction data that has affected the different products and so on, you can check whether what the system holding should be at the end of the next period, for example. And obviously, if that calculation shows a mismatch between what you calculate that it should be and what the system has calculated it should be, then that would be a system problem. But if they are the same, then it's a matter of arithmetic, not opinion. And if the system holding has been calculated correctly, and it's not the same as the declared holdings, then yes, you have a loss and it's not, or a gain, which would appear not to be the fault of the system.
You were adding up what you could see in the two records rather than undertaking any probing investigation into whether there may be a problem with the recording of the transactions on Horizon.
I was adding up the transaction data that had been recorded, which was all I had to go on. I mean, there were obviously I'd checked for things like everything netting to zero, which had been okay apart from the two things that had been the one line identified. I knew from the ARQ extract that part of that checking made sure that the set of messages, there were no gaps in the messages received from the branch. So everything that had been written to the message store on the counters appeared to have been included in the data that I was now doing this comparison with.
This was essentially an accountancy exercise?
It was essentially an accountancy exercise, yes.
Adding up
yeah.
totals in different sets of data with the assistance, presumably, of some Excel?
Yes.
And you say, if we scroll down, please, at paragraph 76, I thought at the time and still think that this was a job for an accountant? Yes?
Yes.
It didn't involve any computer expertise?
Not really, no. No, obviously.
Expertise in computers?
Yes, that's true.
And so your investigation didn't extend to whether there was a problem with the recording of the transactions beyond the extent that you said?
There was no indication of any problem with the recording of the transactions that was visible to me, either when I looked in 2004, when obviously there was more files and things to look at, and okay, it was only for a shorter period, and I couldn't see anything wrong with the recording of the transactions subsequently. It would only be by checking against what the branch had actually intended to record that you could see if there was anything wrong in what had been recorded. There were no gaps in the sequence, but whether certainly it wasn't that individual transactions had been dropped. If that had happened, then you would have receipts and payments mismatches. We didn't have those. Whether entire sessions had not been recorded, that I could not see, and whether some of the sessions that had been recorded were not as intended at the branch, I also could not see that without some way of knowing actually what had happened at the branch.
And one way of doing that would be to send somebody in on balancing day, for example.
Yes, or just during normal processing.
And just watch the sub-postmaster or their clerk do it.
And try to keep a record that you could check against at the end of the day. I mean, the postmaster had a lot of reports that had to be printed out at the end of the day with totals on for pensions and various other things, and I believe that, but this is getting into business stuff, which wasn't, I had less familiarity with, but they were meant to add up the dockets or counterfoils or whatever they got for various things and compare them against the totals on the reports to make sure that what was on the system was consistent with the business that they had done. But that was something that I had no way of cross-checking.
But those are two things that could be done to seek to discover whether there was an underlying problem, and if so, what it was.
Absolutely. And it is possible that if those sort of checks had been done, it might have highlighted some sort of system problem. That, at the time, my view was that seemed very unlikely, but, completely unlikely, completely impossible. But in the light of where we are now, who knows? Because
there's some system faults that are not visible to you sitting in an office in Bracknell.
No, not for that reason. It would be a fault that we still haven't discovered.
Like an unknown system fault that doesn't obviously leave a trace.
Yeah, that doesn't leave any trace, and that nobody notices happening at the time, except somehow you have a loss at the end of the week.
And those kind of the two things that we've just discussed as next steps, are those the kind of things that you imagined the Post Office might do?
Yes, I hoped that Post Office had staff who were very familiar both with the business processes and had a good working knowledge of the Horizon system as well.
The passage of, if we just scroll up, please, to the middle of page 24, please, where you say, if this isn't at all what you wanted, please let me know. I don't really know what I'm doing. What did you mean by I don't really know what I'm doing?
This was the first time I'd tried to calculate a cash account by hand. I think we've seen from looking at them, they're fairly horrible pages and pages of stuff. And I was much more familiar at looking at the trial balance and final balance reports, which lay out the accounts, to my mind, in a much more intuitive way. And then the same data got reanalysed using different mappings, that's saying which products go on which line in the cash account, to produce this document that then I believe had to be signed off and went to post office. And I was much less familiar with how the cash account processing actually allocated things to particular lines. So I was really having to work that out from scratch. And although I was thought I was probably on the right lines, Gareth was much more of an expert in this area, so I really didn't want him just taking what I'd done and without checking it pretty thoroughly.
Thank you. Can we move ahead, please, to poll 3069622? You attended a conference on the 11th of September 2006. A conference meaning a meeting with lawyers and witnesses. And this is an attendance note in respect of it.
Yes.
Mr. Dilly records had a conference with counsel Richard Morgan and Tom Beezer, partner Bond Pierce at Council's Chambers in London. And do you remember going up to London to Council's Chambers?
I remember going up to London to Council's Chambers, yes.
We can see the purpose of the conference is recorded to meet 4 of the key witnesses to go over their draft statements with them.
Yes.
And the conference note records them one by one, starting with Kath Oglesby.
Yes, I don't believe we were all together at the same point. I think we were there separately.
And if we scroll forwards, please, to page 4 at the bottom. And scroll down, please. We see at the foot of this page, the record concerns you. Meeting with Anne Chambers, we went through Anne's witness statement. She said that she had personally got a new set of referrals for 6 years. Now, what does that mean? I don't really understand it.
I have no idea.
And then this, 3 to 4 years, sub-postmasters had been complaining that there is a problem, or have complained if there is a problem. Sometimes there is a major blank, for example. All the cash and stock appears to have vanished out of the office, but these sort of errors are singular and not continual. Would it be right that at this time, so autumn 2006, sub-postmasters have been complaining for 3 or 4 years that there were problems with the Horizon system?
Yes, I think that was probably true. I wouldn't say that there were large numbers of these sort of complaints, but certainly there were some concerns, I think.
And so, remembering as best you can, you would have said, because it would have been accurate, that for 3 or 4 years, sub-postmasters had been complaining about Horizon, rather than 3 or 4 postmasters had reported complaints.
Yes, I think that it does mean that over yes, 3 or 4 years rather than 3 or 4 postmasters. It
would have been wrong to say that only 3 or 4 postmasters had made complaints about Horizon.
Yes, I think so. It certainly wasn't up in the hundreds, but it was probably more than 3 or 4.
You say, or it is recorded that you said sometimes there is a major, and then the word is missing, for example. Can you help us as to what that might be, looking at the context, the missing passage?
Have a major problem. I don't know. I think one of the documents I saw very recently appears to be another bug, error or defect that I had totally forgotten about. When and it was probably started happening round about the time that I was having this meeting, which was probably why it was in my mind, where I can't remember the details, but yes, they rolled over and lost their stock. But that was, it was so obvious that something had gone horribly wrong, if you like, that I believe that got picked up on and investigated. It wasn't something that was affecting many branches, and I think it was those that were doing declare stock, which was not what Mr. Castleton did anyway.
Was this pursued with you in any way? What you said here, that for 3 to 4 years sub-postmasters had been complaining about Horizon, and that sometimes there are major problems, namely cash and stock appears to have vanished out of the office. Questions about what are the problems, how many of them are there, how many sub-postmasters have been affected, how are they recorded in the SSC, can we get access to documents, those kind of questions.
I don't recall any of those kinds of questions. I think I was just being asked generally, are there problems with Horizon? And
you said yes.
I gave a general answer, and then I gave a specific example of something that was happening recently, and also pointed out that these weren't things that were affecting large numbers of branches, to my knowledge.
And so would it be fair to say that in this conference, the nature and extent of the Horizon problems was not explored in any detail?
I think that's true. I mean, to my view at the time, we were talking about Marine Drive, which I was very confident had not had any of these particular problems.
Can we look, please, at your reflections document? That can come down. And instead look at Fujitsu 0015-2299. So we looked at this earlier, do you remember, 29th of January 2007, and there are 4 headings.
Yes.
Approach to SSE staff, review of technical evidence, scroll down, disclosure of evidence, and then over the page, help desk calls.
Yeah.
Did that reflect 4 issues that you had identified as part of this entire process of being asked to give witness evidence and then give evidence in court?
Yes, these were issues that I obviously felt concerned enough about to feel that, having come to the end of this process, I thought that I ought to. I was expecting there to be some sort of investigate, some sort of wrap up, and I felt it was important to get these things down. I'd completely forgotten until this was disclosed to me again that I had written this document, but yes, I very obviously did, and I'm quite glad I did.
Yes. If we go back to the first page, please. The 4 topics, did they reflect quite significant concerns that you had, having come to the end of the process?
Yes.
We've already looked at the first paragraph, approach to SSE staff. Can we look at the second and third paragraphs under that? No, sorry, the second and third paragraphs under topic 1. Thank you. You say, subsequently, before the meeting with the solicitor, he asked me what my availability was in the autumn for the court case. This was the first time there was any mention of the possibility of having to go to court. Repeated assurances that this would all be settled before going to court proved to be unfounded. I appreciate there may be circumstances where witnesses are summoned and have no option but to comply, but I was not at all happy about how this was handled. on that issue, were you expecting something to be done as a result of your raising this issue to regulate the circumstances in which SSC staff were approached to provide evidence for use in court proceedings?
Yes, I think I felt that if this was part of SSC members' role, then that should be made very clear to anybody wanting to join SSC.
Anything beyond that, rather than just telling people, by the way, when you join, when you're one of the 25 or 30 of us, you might end up in court giving evidence. Did you have anything further in mind about regulating how people were approached, in what circumstances they were approached, and bringing some formality to bear?
Yes, I think all of that, and possibly rather more training and guidance than I felt I had.
And so that was your hope?
Yes.
Can we look at your second concern, review of technical evidence? You say, when I took the initial call in February 2004, I only spent a few hours on it before deciding that I could not see any sign of a system problem. I only looked at a couple of weeks' information. I think that probably helps us with some of the answers you were giving yesterday. It
does, yes.
So a few hours would have been within that 5-hour window, and you only looked at a couple, presumably meaning one or two.
Yes. Again, I am writing this 2.5 years later, so my memory of exactly what I'd done was no better than it was in my witness statement.
You say, while in this case I'm now sure I didn't miss anything, and my initial analysis was correct, I'm concerned that there was no technical review of the Horizon evidence between the original call and the case going to court. It's probable that any system problem affecting the accounts would have shown up to post office staff who did check the figures very carefully. But since the postmaster was blaming the system for the losses, I think it would have been sensible to have double-checked this with Fujitsu before it got as far as court. I was certainly concerned in the early stages that there was something I had missed. I'm just stopping there. Were you essentially suggesting by that before court proceedings are launched, the post office should come back to Fujitsu for a check of some kind on the data?
It would seem very sensible if you want to get to the bottom of somebody's problems, if the consequence of those problems means that they may be sent to prison.
And so your hope was that something would be done as a result of you raising this suggestion?
I felt it really needed to be said.
You continue, once in court, I found myself being treated as an expert witness and answering a wide variety of questions about the system, although nominally I was a witness of fact, and my witness statement just covered the investigation done in 2004. Fortunately, I do have extensive knowledge of the system and was able to fulfill a wider role. But what would have happened if the initial call had been handled by a less experienced SSC person? If there's a similar case in future where the system's being blamed, would it not be sensible to have a technical review of all of the evidence at the first indication that a case may be going to court? Someone involved in that review would then be well placed to give evidence in court. Again, is that the same point, but put in a different way?
Yes, I think it probably is. And I would say that I think is the role that Gareth Jenkins then picked up.
You refer there to a technical review of all of the evidence. What did you have in mind?
Anything you could lay your hands on that might be relevant. That was how SSC investigated. But specifically, the starting point would always be the message store for the time and anything else.
On the point that you found yourself being treated as an expert witness, we're of course now aware that other Fujitsu employees attended court and gave evidence against sub-postmasters. Were you aware of that at the time of writing this memo?
At the time of writing this, I think I was only aware that people in the security team had appeared in court. And I'm not sure, I think Gareth had perhaps expected to appear as a witness before this point, but in fact hadn't done so, but he had probably produced witness statements. But I wasn't aware of anybody else in Fujitsu.
After this time, did you come to know that Mr. Jenkins was giving evidence in various trials around the country?
Yes.
Did you discuss with him this issue that you raise here, namely whether you were being treated as an expert witness or a witness of fact, whether that was a problem or a concern for him?
I don't remember discussing it explicitly with him.
Do you know whether this document was sent to him?
I don't know.
Did you send it to him?
As I said, I've got no recollection of I had forgotten that I'd produced this document. If he wasn't on the distribution list of the email, then no, I don't think I would have sent it to him. I think I felt it was something, well, I think I sent it initially to my manager, really to send on to the security team and my manager's management.
And so in the years that followed, you didn't discuss with Mr. Jenkins the status of the evidence that he was going to give or had given, or his understanding of his status?
No, I don't think I ever discussed his specific status. I think perhaps I assumed because he knew so much about everything, he was an expert witness, but that's, in the legal sense, I wouldn't have known precisely what was meant by that.
Can we look at section 3, please? Disclosure of evidence. You say Fujitsu made a major legal blunder by not disclosing all the relevant evidence that was in existence. I found myself in the invidious position of being aware that some information, Tivoli event logs, existed, but not sure whether they'd been disclosed or not, since I'd not been a party to any of the requests for disclosure. It became evident in court they'd not been disclosed. Quoting from an email received from the post office solicitor after my revelation, this was the email you referred to earlier.
Yes.
Quote, this is from Mr. Dilly. We needn't track the actual email down because you've cut and pasted it accurately into this document. In any litigation, the parties involved have a continuing obligation pursuant to the court rules to disclose all documents. They may help or hinder their case or the other side's case. In this context, a document means anything in which information of any description is recorded. So it includes, just for example, a computer database. Previously, I'd asked Fujitsu to let me have all the information it had and had been helpfully given HSH call logs, transaction logs, and event logs. I was also recently told there was a message store which had everything else on it, and we invited Mr. Castleton to look at this, but he didn't take up the opportunity. This suggests that disclosure of the message store itself was an afterthought, though it is fundamental to the system. I know that for fraud cases, the transaction log and event log are extracted from the full message store and submitted, but surely the full message store has to be disclosed in all cases. Just stopping there, you say that I know that for fraud cases, ... That tends to suggest that you did know that there were another species of case being conducted at this time.
Yes, I suppose so. I'm not sure quite why I made that distinction, really, but I knew that the ARQ data which is what we're talking about there, could be obtained, and I suppose I'd assume that was specifically for fraud cases, but...
You say that transaction log and event logs are extracted and submitted in fraud cases. Who did that?
That's the ARQ extract that was done by the security team.
And when you say and submitted, do you mean and submitted to the court?
To post office is probably what I meant.
You say, but surely the full message store has to be disclosed. Is that because, as you earlier said, it's fundamental to the system?
Yes, and I think until I'd seen that email from Stephen Dilly, I think perhaps I hadn't realised that it wasn't disclosed initially. As I said, I didn't know what had been disclosed and what hadn't, but I was very surprised to find that that seemed to be something he'd only heard about recently.
And so would you agree that the full message store from the branch had to be disclosed in all cases in which reliance on Horizon data was made by the Post Office, and merely disclosing standard filtered ARQ data didn't meet the disclosure requirement that have been described to you in this email?
It certainly didn't seem to meet the disclosure requirement that was in this email. I'd only had that email well into this was Christmas 2006. I was surprised.
Were the security department, to your knowledge, aware of all of the files archived to audit servers that held relevant material?
Yes, I didn't know what they were aware of. I thought, yes. I think that paragraph there sort of sums up my knowledge.
That's the next paragraph.
Yeah.
Many other files are also archived to the audit servers as a matter of course and could hold relevant information, although the security team are not necessarily aware of their existence or potential relevance. I'd like to suggest that a list of these files is compiled so that similar mistakes are not made in future. Starting with many other files are also archived to audit servers. What other files were you speaking of?
All sorts of things. It's an enormous computer system, so a lot of back-end files, if you like, were continually being generated. Some of them were transient, others were backed up in one way or another. Some of them were possibly written to the audit servers, although SSC wouldn't have seen those because we didn't have access to the audit servers. So I didn't know what might be there, but I had a feeling there might be a lot of stuff. This wouldn't be specifically counterfiles because some of the diagnostic files that were written that only existed on counters, they wouldn't have been maintained in this way. But there could have been files containing transactions for a branch as well as for lots of other branches that were still in existence. It was really a bit of an unknown, and I thought, well, perhaps somebody ought to try and make sure they know it in case this is relevant in future.
But a known unknown?
Yeah.
And you suggested a list of files being compiled because the security team might not be aware of the existence of such files and therefore their relevance.
Yeah.
To your knowledge, was that done?
I never had any follow-up on any of the things in this document.
You continue, and what about calls on peak, which may have evidence attached? And any evidence which might have been kept within SSC? I was not asked whether I had anything that might have been relevant. As it happens in this case, I did not. Is that because you hadn't attached anything to the peak?
Yes, I didn't attach anything to the peak, and anything that I did have in file store in 2004, I would have kept it for a year and a half, but then I just had to tidy up and got rid of it.
But your point was there needs to be a more systematic approach to this,
yes.
Namely people being asked to give evidence should
yes.
be asked to turn over relevant material.
Yes, I felt that probably, going on what Stephen Dilly was saying, should have been disclosed, then surely that it would have included those sort of things.
You continue, although, of course, there may be subtleties to this that I'm unaware of, whereby data may exist, but there's no obligation to disclose it. If this is the case, could any future witnesses be briefed appropriately? The response, "No one has ever asked for that before," doesn't seem to be a good reason for non-disclosure. Who had given the response, "No one's ever asked for that before"?
I cannot now remember, but since I put it there, it suggests that somebody may have said it.
Within Fujitsu?
Yes, this was all aimed within Fujitsu.
Help desk calls, the last section 4. We just scroll down. This case highlighted a common problem both in 2004 and now. The postmaster raised many calls about his continuing losses, both with Horizon and with the MBSC. These kept being bounced, and it took weeks before a call was passed to the SSC. You're essentially there referring to the evidence that I took you through yesterday morning.
Yes.
Strictly speaking, problems with discrepancies do need to be investigated by MBSC in the first instance. But where there are continuing unresolved problems, it should be possible to get the issue investigated properly, and one of the help desk should be prepared to take responsibility for the incident. Personally, I think the fact that the Horizon help desk is penalised for passing advice and guidance type calls to the third line leads to too many calls being closed without proper investigation or resolution. This is very frustrating for postmasters, though possibly not an issue of concern to the post office. So first of all, you say you think the fact that the Horizon help desk is penalised for passing advice and guidance type calls to the SSC.
Yes, there was some...
What was the penalty?
I cannot now remember whether it was just a black mark or a financial thing. I've no idea. But,
and what are you getting at here? What's the underlying problem here?
They were reluctant sometimes to pass calls to SSC if they thought they were just going to be told off for having passed over a call that they shouldn't have done.
And so what, they bounced it back to the MBSC?
I think that did happen in some cases.
And so what we saw in the many documents I took you through yesterday morning was something that wasn't isolated to this case. It was a recurring problem.
Yes, it was.
And what we've seen is emblematic of a wider problem.
I think so, yes. I mean, certainly the calls we looked at yesterday, I feel that there was at least one where I wish they had passed it on to SSC, possibly two, and it would have avoided some of the toing and froing. I don't believe it would have made any difference to the outcome, but...
You say that it leads to too many calls being closed without proper investigation or resolution. Why did it lead to calls being closed without proper investigation? Because
the help desk were just bouncing them back without it coming to SSC. And there probably were cases where there was a system error that did need to be picked up on. And obviously, in that case, the sooner it came to SSC, the better.
And so that would just be bounced back. And if the postmaster wasn't persistent...
That did happen, yes.
It would just be closed off.
Yes, that did happen.
And what would happen to if there was a loss? They just have to pay up?
If they couldn't find the reason for the loss as a business issue. As I say, discrepancies were most likely not to be system problems, but they could be, and certainly we'll see when we go through the rest of the bugs, errors and defects that there were cases where it should have been reported to SSC years before it actually was. And there was this, we got calls that through to SSC that probably shouldn't have been passed through to us, but there were also others that should have come to us that didn't reach us.
And so all the while the system error was continuing?
The one I'm thinking about, yes, although that...
Which one are you thinking about in particular?
The one that gave 14 branches a loss every February.
That went on for a number of years.
2 years.
Yeah.
Same branches.
You say this is very frustrating for postmasters.
Yes, I think Mr. Castleton would probably agree with that.
You're not basing that opinion just on Mr. Castleton's case.
No.
That's at the time of writing your
Yeah.
6 or 7 years accumulated experience.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And you say it's possibly not an issue of concern to the post office. Why didn't you think the post office was possibly not really concerned about this?
I think by this point I had realised that the outcome for the postmasters was not post office's primary consideration.
What was the post office's primary consideration?
I think by this point it was fairly clear that they were keen on defending the integrity of their system rather than trying to get to the bottom of issues, whether system problems or business problems affecting individual branches.
So it was more important in your accumulated experience to the post office to defend the integrity of Horizon rather than conduct a proper investigation to determine whether the system is causing discrepancies.
Whether the system or business practices at the post office are causing the discrepancies.
And can you help us, that overarching view that you've just expressed, on what information or evidence was it based?
I think partly in the case of Mr. Castleton that they didn't appear to have made any attempt to help him get to the bottom of the problems that he was having, and that it was just seen that, oh well, you know, he's signed these things off, therefore that's his responsibility. I mean, when I started working on Horizon, I didn't appreciate the fact that the sub-postmasters really didn't work for Post Office, but they were a third party in all this. Any other systems I'd ever worked on, if there was a problem and I said, well, I can't see anything wrong on the system side, then the customer, if they continue to have problems, would push back quite strongly and say, but look, this isn't right, we need to sort it, and then we would work together to sort it out. But with the case of Post Office, and it took me quite a long time to realise how it worked, the postmasters they didn't have the power to do the pushing back. And our client, Post Office, who would have had that power, did not seem interested in doing that.
And how was that manifested itself outside of Mr. Castleton's case?
I just think in other cases where I had looked where there were discrepancies or problems and I was not able to find any system problem and was pretty sure there was not a system problem, but I could, you know, they were having losses or whatever, and I would say, well, you know, perhaps your manager can help you resolve this, and the postmaster's view on that bit of advice was not usually indicative that they thought that would be successful.
And this is you expressing that contemporaneously back in 2007 rather than now,
Yeah.
Through the sentence, possibly not an issue of concern to the Post Office.
Yeah.
In that sentence.
Yeah.
Standing back, we can take that document down. Thank you. Do you agree that you were in this afterthoughts document raising a series of fundamental and important issues about the process of giving evidence in court in proceedings which concerned data produced by the Horizon system.
Yes, I mean, I was doing it really from my personal point of view, having been through this process. I just felt it needed to be fed back as things that concerned me.
You raised an issue about the need for a proper technical review of a wide range of data before proceedings were even launched. Yes?
That was a suggestion.
You raised an issue over confusion as to whether a witness was giving evidence of fact or opinion evidence.
Yes, yes, I don't think anybody had ever mentioned opinion evidence as an option.
You raised an issue about witnesses being asked to speak about the reliability of Horizon more generally, rather than about the narrow work that they had actually done.
So I don't think that was particularly a concern. It was just being... it wasn't... It was just sort of being asked, not necessarily about the reliability, but about anything that was outside what I thought I was meant to be talking about.
These are all issues you now know, I think, which have come to afflict the presentation of the Post Office's cases against sub-postmasters in criminal proceedings.
Yes.
You were then, back in 2007, describing issues that may have afflicted past and then current criminal prosecutions, albeit you had no knowledge of those.
Yes.
Would you agree that you were raising a series of red flags?
Yes, I'm not sure I thought about that at the time, thought about it like that at the time. I just thought there were lessons to be learned.
Would you agree that it was important for both Fujitsu and the Post Office to address these issues and to address them properly and promptly?
I was putting forward my point of view, and yes, I hoped it might have some impact for the future.
You weren't raising them to be ignored?
No, no.
Nor as a sort of an insurance policy against what you had done?
No, not at all.
You weren't going to give evidence again, to the best of your knowledge?
That's true, yes.
And this was to help others, presumably?
Yes.
Whether those others be sub-postmasters or your colleagues?
Yeah.
Can we see what was done with your report, please, and look at Fujitsu 0015 2300? Can we see at the foot of the page, please, an email of the 29th of January 2007? That's the date of your report, remember, 29th of January 2007.
Yeah.
From Mick Peach to Brian Pinder, security manager, is that right?
Yes.
Naomi Elliott, that's Mr. Peake's manager, is that right?
Mr. Peach's manager, yes.
So Peaches, yes. And copied to you.
Yes.
Mop up on the Castleton case subject. Brian, I understand from Anne that you do not intend to have an internal review on the Castleton case. Stopping there, had you asked Mr. Pinder whether there was going to be an internal review?
I have no memory of that, but I assume I had done.
That tends to suggest you had.
Yes.
And he'd said no.
Yeah, I assume so.
Nevertheless, we are concerned that POA, that means Post Office account.
Yes. Fujitsu.
Does that mean Fujitsu?
Yes, Fujitsu.
So the Fujitsu Post Office account made some errors during the course of this case, which could prove critical in any future litigation. To this end, Anne has written up her thoughts and comments attached, and I welcome your comments and your documents in attachment.
Yes.
And if we scroll up and see what the reply was, please. 5th of February, so about a week later,
Yes.
an email addressed to you and Mr. Peach, copied to Naomi Elliott, and then in the title addressed to you, Mick Ann. Thanks, Mick. There was no intention to have a wash-up on this particular case as such, but I must stress that from the outset this was new ground and a particularly unusual case, first of its kind in 10 years for all concerned. It involved many different variables which at any point in time could have culminated in a totally different outcome. Inquiry took well over a year to conclude, and routine procedures, which have served us well for 10 years, were suddenly being stretched to new limits. But it does highlight how, in brackets, POA can be called to account. And I totally agree we must learn from this. And many thanks for your comments. You have highlighted some interesting areas of procedure which we need to recognise. I will discuss these with Naomi and keep you both informed. Did you ever hear anything again?
Not that I recall, but since I'd forgotten this, who knows?
We haven't got a record of anything
No.
else happening as a result of this.
No.
Would it be unfair to describe this as a pat on the head?
Yes. No, sorry, not unfair. It would be fair.
It's fair. Well done, and thanks.
Yeah.
We're just filing this.
Yeah.
Is that how you read it?
Yes.
Overall, thank you, that document can come down. Overall, your view was that something was going wrong at Marine Drive. You couldn't see what the problem was, and the only way to progress matters was at the branch.
Yes.
That needed Post Office to take some action, didn't it?
Yes.
And so far as you're aware, that wasn't done.
That didn't appear to be done.
Thank you very much. Those are the only questions I'm going to ask on the Castleton case. Thank you.
Okay.
So we're going to move now to look at some of the bugs, errors and defects held over from last time. I wonder whether I could impertinently ask for a lunch break now, because it's a useful stopping off point, and break until 1:30.
Of course, Mr. Beer. So we'll resume at 1:30.
Thank you very much, sir.